Welcome back to another edition. A few months ago, I wrote a column in the weekly column that I do called Wealth Equals Well-Being Only If You Spend It When You Need to. And I thought maybe this would be something to go into. I also went into it in an interview with South Dakota Public Broadcasting, which those episodes are done once a month and can be found on my website if you're interested. Lori Walsh, who is the host of the show called In the Moment, is a phenomenal interviewer and has really worked on and embodied a lot of the things we've talked about. And I find that pretty impressive with any type of journalist or media person. So in this particular article, I talk about Scrooge, A Christmas Carol, which was written by Dickens. And Scrooge represents one of the most famous, if not the most famous, miser in history. Dickens describes him in the book as a tight-fisted hand at a grindstone, squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous. Calls him an old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from whom no warmth could ever come. It's quite a description, isn't it? And in that column, I talked about some of the things that I've read that psychological experts have diagnosed him with. And they included OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, narcissism, and post-traumatic embitterment disorder. And first, before I get to my point with that, I just took a little deep dive, which is going down the rabbit hole, which is something I've been doing recently. Some to benefit and a lot not to really any great benefit. I don't know. Maybe that's a little OCD. I'm not sure. But I came up with those disorders and maybe another one that have been written about by various psychologists over the years. So I thought it would be interesting to take a look at those. The first being what really grabbed my attention was post-traumatic embitterment disorders. Now, I should say before I get too far into this that I belong to the mental health camp that shuns diagnosis and disorders. They can really objectify a person rather than making a person a person. So it can kind of become treating the disorder, not the person. And I'm going to do my best in breaking down these disorders into what's going on in the person. But I just thought it was interesting from a psychological aspect that these disorders were labeled by others. And it's out there. And in fact, they can put this all together into one called the Scrooge Syndrome. So I just want to break this down a little bit. The PTED, post-traumatic embitterment disorder, is not really a DSM-5 disorder, but I think it's worth exploring. The potential cause of this embitterment disorder is loss and loneliness from a past trauma. Okay, we can personalize that pretty easily, that's the wounding. That's in IFS speak, the exile, loss, and loneliness. So protecting that, the effect, the behavior, is bitterness, cynicism, negativity, and social isolation. The next one was obsessive compulsive personality disorder. We've probably all heard a lot about that. The potential cause can be the rigid upbringing or early life experiences. They really didn't get into the underlying exiles on this, which we can take a look at. And the behavior is rigid routines, aversion to change, discomfort in social situations. The third that I found, well, the third that I mentioned in the article was narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, which has a sense of entitlement or superiority. That's listed under potential cause, but that's not the cause. That is the outcome, which also with Scrooge is a self-centeredness, dismissive attitude toward other people. And the fourth one I found was schizoid personality disorder, which is isolation or neglect. And that effect can be seen in the emotional detachment, okay? Probably just being completely disconnected emotionally from a situation, and loneliness. So let's just take a little bit of a look under the hood there with the post-traumatic embitterment disorder. While we don't have all of the details of Scrooge's life, right? Okay, so this is trying to diagnose someone and a fictional character, and there's so much more needed, right? But these hints at his loss and loneliness, okay, and that can shape the negativity and the bitterness. So this can show up with a lot of intrusive thoughts or memories. So it's possible that Scrooge was haunted by memories of his past trauma, okay, which can lead to a lot of turning this over and over and over in the mind, ruminating on it, and negativity. Numbing out is something that a protector can help us do. Disassociation was actually a word I was looking for a few minutes ago. Just with a real difficulty of experiencing emotions, whether they are difficult emotions, sometimes labeled as negative, and I don't really buy into the fact we have negative and positive emotions. They can be difficult emotions, and also difficulty experiencing lighter emotions, which would be labeled as positive of sorts. Just with the pain that is there, that is numbed out by a manager, could be a firefighter. Then there's the social isolation, the withdrawing from people is a real easy way to avoid triggers or reminders of trauma. So this is so true. And I can see that in myself of sometimes I just want to be alone, or I don't necessarily want to get out and be with people. And the question is, so what's underneath that? Is it truly a fatigue or a need to recharge, as might be the case with myself, because on the Myers-Briggs, I'm an I, introvert, and introverts need time to themselves to recharge? Or is that recharging time a mask to that perhaps I've been triggered and I need time to cover that back up, and going out or being with people could just further expose it? I don't know. I'm just raising some potential questions there. And anger and cynicism is part of this. So bitterness and negativity toward others can come from unresolved anger in past experiences that is being shut down, masked. Can be so true in the type 1 and the type 9 on the Enneagram, where the last thing they want to feel is that anger. And also, as a part of all this, there can be a difficulty in trusting other people. And difficulty trusting, again, is a manager to protect vulnerable parts, hurt parts, from further hurt, from further activation. So we know that the key to all of this is taking a look under the hood of the defense mechanisms of the managers and firefighters, those protective parts of ourselves that work so hard to keep those vulnerable parts, those wounded parts, those parts that have suffered trauma quiet. And ultimately, the key to all of that is going to those vulnerable parts and really giving those stories a chance to come forth and be validated for the deep pain. And eventually, in doing so, we can liberate ourselves from continuing to hold those. Obsessive compulsive personality disorder, that could be seen in his rigid routines, his frugality, his aversion to change. That hits really close to home. So that, and the fixed routines, the aversion to change, all of that can be protective. And it can create distance and even discomfort in social situations. Again, they're all mechanisms that our protective parts of ourselves use to keep exiles, so to speak, safe. Schizoid personality disorder. Just the isolation that he had can be a sign of this particular disorder. Now, it's interesting that one write-up said that his capacity for connection with the spirits suggests a lot of complexity here, because he was able to take a look under the hood on it. Same with narcissistic personality disorder. There's this sense of entitlement that comes from this, and importance really are traits of this. And again, his ability to be transformed wouldn't clinically, as I understand it, align with this diagnosis. And that's kind of probably where I differ a lot, is that the belief in the IFS, what do I want to say, characteristic, factor, is that every person has the power has a self that can liberate us from all these disorders that we can be, because these are simply really deeply wounded parts of us that we have locked away and not visited for great and various fear. So that was a lot to dig out of one sentence in this particular article, but I wanted to go into that since listeners of this podcast have more of a curiosity on the emotional and psychological side of things. And the point I made in the article was that the argument for all of these disorders is that he cared only for himself. He focused only on himself. And what I'm suggesting is that really doesn't stand up. I think what we're seeing is that he didn't care for himself any more than he cared for other people. Why? He lived in a warehouse. It was described as dark and cold and gloomy. He refused to spend money on heating. The book says that he lit only a candle, a single candle, because darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. So he was isolated, and he lived in really uncomfortable living conditions, which I don't see in the biggest picture was caring for himself. I don't see a picture of well-being here. I don't see a picture of emotional, physical, or financial well-being here. So to say he only cared for himself is a real mistake, in that it's a projection that we can have onto somebody like Scrooge when he's not caring for himself at all. And likewise, he's not caring for other people either. We could go further. He ate gruel, it said, okay? He neglected proper nutrition. When his nephew came and welcomed him to a feast, he opted to eat Christmas Eve in a tavern that was described as a melancholy tavern, and that he had a melancholy dinner there. So there was just a basic disregard for nutrition. The book also suggests he had minimal clothing, that he had few personal belongings, and invested little in personal grooming and cleanliness. He refused to seek medical care or the professional help. Dickens supports that by saying Scrooge was his own lawyer, his own doctor, his own surveyor, his own everything, and never troubled anybody with his affairs. So we can see some real aversions to asking for help. And of course, this underscores the isolation. So think about this. This quote suggests that Scrooge, while having the money to afford the best in professional support, refused to ask for help from others, even for the things he wasn't qualified to do himself. Let that sink in. He had all this money. He could have gotten this easily. What were the money scripts? What were the woundings that were so strong, so unattended to, so deep, that he could not bear to possibly even acknowledge his need for these things, much less reach out. Yeah, this doesn't look like a person that only cares for themselves. It looks like quite the opposite. A person that absolutely has no concern for his true financial, emotional, and physical well-being. And when I read this really sunk in. This is a money script that I've known I've had. And it brings it back up that the money script is, if you have money, you'll have the best in food, shelter, clothing, medical care. That could be true, like all money scripts in some cases. But in this case, completely false. So put this all together, and it's called the Scrooge Syndrome. So, why? And when we look beneath this, we're reminded the end of the book, where Scrooge is transformed. He becomes the opposite of what he has lived for all of his years. The opposite of this cold, miserly, self-loathing, and uncaring person. And I think the key to this transformation wasn't having the money, wasn't accumulating more, wasn't understanding all this better, but it was the journey, the personal journey that he took to go within, to take that frightening and terrifying journey to look under the hood. And this all began with the intervention of a trusted friend. A friend who cared enough to risk bringing up some knowledge, giving him a reflection of knowledge. And it was so interesting to me that when his friend, who is deceased, who is in the story a ghost, came to him a lot of times. And for some reason, it was this Christmas Eve that Scrooge saw him. This reminds me of the teaching that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And Marley says, I've come to you so many times in the past. Why is it this time that you see me? Now, that's an interesting one to answer. And I'm not going to attempt to go into that. But the timing needs to be right. When we're really ready. When our hearts are open to consider. It's moving from, in the stages of change, that pre-contemplation, which Scrooge lived in pre-contemplation. He didn't know that he didn't know. And he wasn't even willing to look because he had no clue. These issues were there. Something happened where he began to even consider the possibility that there might be something to look at. And he was pretty reluctant to go down this road. It didn't flip like that. But a little crack happened where he was willing to consider, consider, which is contemplation. So he accepted the help of the guides of the spirit of Christmas past, present, and future. And they helped him not only look at his past, but really feel. If you read the book, he laughed, he cried, he trembled, he physically shook with fear. All of these are stages, can be stages, but I will say necessary stages of experiencing the feelings that have been locked away long ago. And in doing that, he was able to resolve those woundings, to finish what was unfinished, and see how they affected his present life, and to realize that he did have the emotional capacity with these traumas processed, so to speak, to do things differently going forward. He wasn't thinking his way to doing things differently. He was feeling his way to doing things differently. So the bottom line of all of this is that this Scrooge Syndrome, which has disregard for self-care and uses isolation from other people to protect those wounded parts, is a warning not to confuse wealth with well-being. Wealth does not equal well-being. That money script, that wealth equals well-being, is like all money scripts. It's only partially true. It can be true in some situations and terribly false in others. So his story reminds us that having money helps give us the potential for well-being if we choose to use it for that purpose. And now to the punchline, 27 and a half minutes later, is that one component of financial therapy, one component of financial life planning is helping clients create financial security for retirement. And yet that security is worthless until we spend the money that we have when we need it. So Scrooge discovered spending on essential intangibles that support health, happiness, family connection, physical, financial, emotional well-being, relationships, is the wisest way to turn wealth into well-being. So that's the takeaway, is that we just can't accumulate money to accumulate it. It needs to be spent at some point in time, wisely, at the right time. But it needs to support, wealth needs to support our well-being. Thanks so much for joining me. I look forward to being with you again next week. Take care.